There are many politically confused people, and very few people have political or ethical positions that are completely coherent. Arguably, nobody does, depending on how in the weeds you want to get on ethics. You know, it's not as though philosophers have solved that subject. The best we can really do is keep our messaging simple and broadly relatable. This, to me, is one of the greatest failings of liberal feminism and liberal anti-racism, in large part that by being individualized, they are largely a matter of correcting individual behavior, which turns into this oppression Olympics pissing contest that I don't think legitimately makes people any less racist or society any less racially biased. There's a person I'm thinking of, a woman who wrote books on this. We make fun of her on my channel. It's Robin DiAngelo. Representative, I think, of a sort of broader trend where progressivism is sold to people as a kind of self-help, you know? Self-help is great. I say this, dripping with sarcasm, not just because it makes us better, but because it makes other people know that we're doing better than we were before. You know, it turns personal progress into a commodified and representative, sort of aspect of ourselves. And in doing so, it essentially turns it all into a great big virtue signal. And now we're in the weeds, and people will argue over, say, Latin, like Latin X, like
Yeah.
people get real
Yeah.
upsetty spaghetti over stuff like that, and people get real in the weeds over very particular specifics over elements of transgender politics or race politics. Unfortunately, the fact of the matter is this: the nitty-gritty of these issues are largely irrelevant in the face of the broader questions. Do we want to live in a country where black and white people have equal opportunity to achieve in life? What does equal opportunity look like? Do trans people deserve to exist? Questions to which, of course, I all say yes, but many people don't. But when you get
Mhm.
into the nitty-gritty on these issues, you're now operating on a weakened position. Not just because even if you win this argument, you haven't really convinced anyone of anything outside of this particular minutia, but also because politically uninvolved people will see the minutia of the argument as evidence of how particular and divorced from real issues you are. A person with no real political investment, if they hear a leftist sincerely arguing for some like very specific thing about the trans people, even if they're completely correct, don't get me wrong, even if they're fully correct in doing so, you must understand that to an average person who's not that invested in this issue, they'll think of you as a kind of like, oh, look at where the left has gone now. It used to just be about defending women and trans people, but now you have to know all this nonsense. You have to be on board with all this. This is not to say that you should completely abandon these problems or you should just take the conservative side. God, no. It's only to say that an effort should be made to make the arguments you have on as broad a subject as possible, as many times as possible, to get carried away in the details as infrequently as possible, because you have very, very, very little to win and comparatively more to lose in those circumstances.
I see a rise in alt-right ideas take hold in teens and youth adults through memes and internet culture. What do you think is a good approach to inform these teenagers and young adults the nefarious purpose behind these memes?
Well, part of this, unfortunately, is that kids are stupid and cruel, with a poor understanding of the effect of their behavior, and that's just a sort of inevitable and unavoidable problem that we're just going to have to deal with. This is why I'm so insistent on making leftism, or at least progressivism, approachable. I'm a little bit older than the people in your room, but I've been on TikTok enough to know that unfortunately a lot of young people's first exposure to leftism is going to be a 300,000 like TikTok on how like men do this thing that's bad, and if they didn't do that thing, then things would be better. This is not a spectacular introduction to progressivism if you're on the receiving end of this criticism, a highly individualized criticism at that. I think we should focus on directing people's antagonisms outward. It's pretty difficult to get a 13-year-old white boy, speaking as somebody who was once a 13-year-old white boy, to get on board with leftist politics by telling them that they're not sufficiently checking their male privilege and that they need to be more conscious of microaggressions when interacting with women. It can be pretty easy to get them on board if you talk to them about some externalized problem. Income inequality, the way cities are built that restricts us, car culture, geopolitics, the way that our, budgetary issues are mishandled by our government, And I think overridingly, like, everybody wants to feel special, but especially when they're young, talk to them on their level and make it clear to them that they're being talked down to with the right wing. Reactionaries rely on their audiences being stupid. Why is your life bad? Why do you experience these problems? Oh, it's simple. It's because of X group. Or this very simple, like, oh, just dislike these people, this problem, something and so, point out that this is happening to them. I think it makes them a bit more receptive to, to proper critique. Oh, and leftists need to get way better at talking about male loneliness and dating issues. I have seen very few left-leaning sources that deal with this in anything that approximates like responsible coverage. It's usually just like making fun of lonely guys for being lonely, and like basically everyone feels lonely when they're a teenager, so that's going to move a lot of people to the right. They'll feel like they're being sort of like they're being laughed at, basically, like there are a bunch of lefties and women who are like mocking them, and then some conservatives like, oh, well, actually it's because they haven't taken the red pill or whatever, and they're quite receptive to that at that age.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good answer. Following up with that, with like the rise of like fascism through memes and internet culture, there's I think a specific problem when it comes to like leftist organizing, which is a specific brand of fascism that like it seems that only the left breeds, which is that which allows the crimes of like Russia or Syria or China or the DPRK, and which excuses those crimes. And oftentimes the sort of like justification for those crimes is that of like it's pretty much interchangeable with that of like fascists. It's usually having to do with the ethnicity and authoritarianism and stuff. And so how do you think is probably the best way to make sure that those ideas don't propagate within the left?
Well, I think at the end of the day, it comes down to essentialization, which is the critical problem with most bad politics. They engage in something I like to call American diabolism, the opposite to American exceptionalism, where they believe that America is so intrinsically and inimicably bad that anything which opposes it must be good, or at the very least defensible, no matter what it's actually doing. In reality, of course, it's far more complicated than this. America has orchestrated an enormous number of bad things abroad. But this is very much like defending the murderer because the alternative is allowing him to be arrested by the police, which are an oppressive institution. We engage in more nuance. We understand that not everything is this like bipolar black and white, dichotomy when we talk about most social issues. And we have to apply the same internationally. Geopolitics is, some may be surprised to hear this, really complicated, actually. And it's it's quite difficult, I think. Your understanding of these issues is so limited sometimes. It becomes a sporting match, But other countries defended by many of these groups don't even subscribe to this themselves. Russia and China haven't had a good relationship since the 70s, or the Soviet Union and China, back then. The relationship between Bolivia and Russia is broadly strained. Likewise with China. Syria's relationship with Russia is in a way kind of mutually destructive, depending on your aims. It's just a very simplistic way of thinking of things, at the end of the day, everybody wants a good guy to root for. And unfortunately, geopolitics is an inappropriate venue to demonstrate that bias. Another reason that I should appeal to the TikTok crowd is because they're all very superficial, and I'm just so handsome with my my middle part. I just looks like I look like such an E-man, you know? Ooh. Uh, uh. I look like Noah Samson's dad. Good.